This is the Perfect RIA, in case you didn't know. Bringing you all the strategies to help your business grow. Are you happy? Are you satisfied? Are you hanging on the edge of your seat? Sit back and listen in while you feel the beat, yeah!
Work smarter, not harder? Are you kidding me? You're not working at all.
Welcome back to another amazing episode of the Perfect RIA podcast. I'm your co-host, Micah Shalansky, and with me, as usual, the legendary Matthew Jarvis. What's going on, bud?
Micah, I'm back in Las Vegas, looking out the window at some sunshine, excited to be back home and excited to do another podcast. It's interesting. You and I were laughing before we started the show, and this is really true. Like, even our very first episode, we thought, if nobody ever listens to this, like, we're still going to have fun. And we always joke that it was starting another company was cheaper than therapy. And here we are, and we're 1.5 million downloads later, and we're 60 or 70,000 downloads a month. And so thank you for the entire TPR Nation for keeping this going. But Micah, thank you. This has really been a lot of fun. Here we are on our 200th episode, which is hard to believe.
It is. It's a little crazy to believe. Now, I almost introduced Jarvis instead of just saying with me, Matthew Jarvis is Wilson. I think it was Mr. Wilson, right? Who was that guy from Home Improvement that was always behind the thing? That's what you look like right now with your new microphone. It's like covering his face.
But yeah, I'm trying out some new microphones. So for fellow podcasters, if you've got a microphone that you really like that can just be plugged in USB. So I'm playing around with this.
All right. So one of the things that we wanted to get all fired up on, this is all fiery podcast. So if you're not in a mood for a good sermon, maybe it's not an episode for you. But this episode title is Effing Work. I don't know if the team is gonna edit that out, but the concept is so often we talk with team members, we talk with other advisors, we talk with these other things, and we get caught up, I think, Jarvis, with this illusion, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll take responsibility for it, or I'll blame you. Is that we bring and say, you know what, it makes it look sometimes so easy because we're able to spend time with our family, we're able to do all these things, etc. And people say, oh, well, I'm going to spend the same amount of time with my family, and I'm going to take all of this time off. I'm going to do all this, but they're missing that one key element, that one thing that they have to do, which is freaking work.
Oh, totally. And I think sometimes, Micah, maybe we've created this in the Perfect RIA, right? We have this endless quest for efficiency, but efficiency is about doing the task faster, right? How do we reduce unnecessary steps? As a friend of mine used to say, if you can scare him with boo, don't say boo boo, which was kind of a silly thing. He used to always say that. But too often we have team members, we see advisors that are just saying, like, I'm just not going to do the work. We say, hey, you've got a seminar coming up. How many times have you practiced it? I decided I was going to spend the evening with my family instead of practicing it. No. You miss this, right? You miss this. Why not just stop working at all? You can be homeless with your family, spend all the time you want. There are reps that have to be done. Can you do them faster? Maybe. There are ways to do them faster. They still have to be done.
If you have made poor decisions and played office throughout the day that you haven't got your crap done and you have to practice the seminar at night, then you have made poor decisions. Take your lumps and practice the damn seminar. That's just the way that it works. And I think that we're coming to this I don't know, society, this place in here where people are saying, no, that, my cutoff time is this. We're becoming back to clock watchers, yes. Right? And saying the aspect of what we're going for here is efficiency, which I totally agree with you. And I'm going to tweak that a little bit, Jarvis, or push back on you and saying, I want effectiveness, right?
Yes,
Efficiency is doing things, quickly and smoothly, et cetera. Effectiveness is doing the right things. Right? So if I streamline a completely worthless process and I have it all smooth and doing it, I'm still doing a completely worthless process, right? I got to be effective with my time. And that's when I go back and says, look, advisors need to focus on 3 main things. And that's pretty much all they need to focus on: seeing clients, prospecting, and strategic work. Yeah, yep. Compliance is in there, so there's a little bit of another one. But those are the main things that advisors need to focus on. If you're not doing that, you are playing office. But guess what with prospecting is practicing. Guess what with client events is practicing. With meeting with clients is practicing. Now, only the pros practice. When I'm talking to another advisor and I'm looking at their income level, I know whether they practice before meetings or not. Hands down. Jarvis, do you think that's an overstatement?
No, I have yet to see an exception. I looked for exceptions to that for a long time, and there just are not any. And so there's all these things where we look and say, oh, this person's doing it these ways. No, they're not. You're just not seeing it. It's just like the pro, right? We go to a football game and it looks like all those pro athletes are just walking on the field, ho hum. No, they've been practicing endlessly. Part of this, Micah, is you and I and other top performers, we're looking for work. Now, this seems counterintuitive to the Perfect RIA message. But when I'm in the office, I am looking for how do I up my game? How do I do work? Let's use an example that you and I were recently ranting on to each other. which is doing client events or seminars in general. So we just did the first in-person seminar that we had done in years. By the way, for members of the Backstage Pass, it is now available. You can watch this event. It's not a great recording, but I recorded it so everybody could see it. I was ahead of time. What was I doing, Micah? I was making sure that all the batteries and all the remotes were replaced. I was making sure all the cords were still in the bucket, that no one stole them. I replaced all of the markers. Now, this probably could have been something done by my team, but I thought, this is the first event we've done in years, literally years. I want this to be a top performance. And that's everything I do. Everything I do, I'm looking and saying, how do I make this a top performance? And maybe, Mike, I'm scared and I have imposter syndrome or whatever the case may be. I want everything I do to be the very best that's ever been done.
Well, Jarvis, not to push back on your team, because we can put in mind in just a second here. Did your team do all those things?
No.
Okay, right. So now we could say this is a failure of leadership. We can blame Jarvis on this one, right?
Please do.
And just say, we didn't spell it out clear enough. We didn't do all of those things, etc. But this is the thing: when you're doing a new thing, or when you're picking up a new thing, that's the reason I want to pick on this. I'm not making fun of Jarvis' team.
No. I mean,
they do a great job on things, but whenever we're doing a new thing, you as the leader need to step in, and someone needs to own that. And generally, the person that needs to own it is the person that's going to be on stage, because you are really committed to making sure your markers work when you get up in front of an audience. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you've never been in front of a stage. I know Jarvis knows this. We've never talked about it, but I'm sure it's happened. You get in front of stage and you didn't check the friggin' markers, and they dried out, and you go to write something on the easel and the damn markers doesn't work. 1 doesn't work, 2 doesn't work. You're like, oh, for the love of God, please let 3 work. And you're losing credibility with the audience. And if you don't think it matters, you're wrong. Everything counts.
Matters.
Everything helps. Everything hurts. Everything counts. It's in one of those 2 categories, including the color of your markers. Here's a really easy one. If you're doing presentations, what you should be doing, you should do this before you get to the event. You can also do it the day of the event. Right on the easel with all of your markers, go to the back of the room, and can you see the colors? Right? Some colors, yellow, they don't go that far, especially with older eyes, right? So, and I pick on my dad in a very good way, but I have him in the back of the room and said, great, can you see this? Yes, I can. What does it say? No, I can't read it. Okay, wait, boom. And we throw out the yellow markers. There's no yellow markers, right? And so any of those colors that aren't going to be adding value, and you could think this is a minor thing. No, it's not. You talk to any top performer, this counts. Everything counts. So you got to be willing to put in that extra frigging effort and to push this thing over to have a 10x event, to have an event that people will talk about. Or it's one that's going to say, well, I don't know why I should come into Micah. He's just like every other advisor, right? He doesn't even know how to get the right markers.
This is where, Micah, I again and again keep top performers in my mind. For me, for a lot of years, it was Tom Gallo. It could be, professional athlete. What would that person do in this situation? Again, so we did this client event, and the way that we did the event, it was myself and a guest speaker, and we were both sitting on chairs in the front. So I came well before anybody else showed up, and I sat in that chair, and I took time to look at each chair in the room. So there was 45 chairs in the room, and I took time from that to look at each chair to just sort of visualize, how am I going to speak to that person? How am I going to speak to that person? How am I going to draw the person from table 7 into this presentation? And you could listen and think, well, that's not efficient. That takes time. Yeah, but my presentation was phenomenal, and every single person was drawn in. I knew how to make eye contact with each person. But we see the same thing with professionals on every stage. Whether they're comedians, they'll stand up on the stage before anyone's there. Okay, where am I going to make eye contact? We see this with quarterbacks. They'll go out on the field before the game starts, and they'll say, all right, where's my reference point? Where are the stands? Where's the displays? Where am I going to reference? All of these things matter, and top performers, they work like maniacs to make that happen.
And if you have kids, I think practicing your seminar at home is fantastic. I was talking to the advisors in our team. I said, what you need to do is get a bright light, shine it in your eyes, and go practice your presentation, have your kids run around the house. And if they're disturbing you and you can't do your presentation, you haven't practiced it enough. Totally. That's the sign, because real life things will happen in that audience, and they're going to distract you. And so you got to say, okay, when I get distracted in this presentation, how am I going to get back on track? And you need to practice that. When you make a mistake, our presentations are 8 friggin' hours long. They start at 8 o'clock, they wrap up at 4. It's a lot of presentation that we have. And so when you have that, I'm going to make a gaffe. I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to say something the wrong way. Odds are just there. Now, I could worry about not saying I have to say everything correctly, or I could just come up with a plan and practice a couple of scripts that when I make a mistake, how am I going to correct it and how am I going to move on? Okay, well, the one that empowers me is practicing these scripts. So I'm going to practice them, and I'm going to practice them in front of the room, just like you, Jarvis. So important.
Well, there's so many pieces on this, and a lot of this goes to I'm just constantly looking at how do I make this a better experience. So we're on this topic of client events. For example, I noticed years ago that there was sort of this awkward time between when lunch wrapped up or dinner, and because we always do events over meals, and when the presentation started. So I thought, what could I do to make this more interesting? And then I remember that at a lot of comedy clubs, I love going to comedy clubs, they will play reels of other comics before the main comic gets on. So we got a reel of comics, like cartoon ads that are about money, and it just scrolls through. And so that gives them something to be engaged in. Now that takes time too. I've got to find those. I've got to have somebody put them into a PowerPoint deck, et cetera, et cetera. But again, we keep going back to this, and I know we're on this soapbox here, but if you're an advisor listening, right, you need to look at everything in your life and be really honest with yourself and say, hey, where am I slacking off under the guise of I'm running a lifestyle practice, under the guise of I'm trying to be effective, versus where do I really need to put in the time? And it can really be time.
And when I'm preparing for a client meeting, we practice. We're having a dress rehearsal. Everybody's coming in. I have a list of things that I am willing and prepared to go over in a search meeting. I will only get to a handful of them, but I'm not walking. This is my own head trash, right? So maybe it's my own mental limitation. I'm not walking into a client meeting without knowing exactly everything on an agenda, feeling extremely empowered to add value to their situation. Even though we may only get to a fraction of that because whatever's going on in their life, I am coming in fully prepared. I'm not coming in with one thing, hoping they have questions, right? I'm not coming in just practicing the presentation once and hoping it goes really well and I don't get distracted and they don't throw me a curveball. The same thing across the board. All of this stuff you have to practice.
So much of this boils down to, and we sort of started the episode with this, the top performing advisors, the advisors that are delivering the most value to clients, which is reflected by the amount of money they're making. The advisors that are delivering the most value are the ones that are doing the hard things. And so as a listener, as you're looking at your life, at your practice, it's not hours in the seat. Yes, you need to put hours in the seat. It's, are you doing the hard things? Nobody likes to practice their events. I know we had Brian Skinner on the podcast. The guy does phenomenal seminars. He's one of our longtime Invictus members. He practices every flippin' word of his presentation, and he watches the recording of his practice, and he goes through and he talks to anybody he knows that's doing a great job doing presentations. He says, hey, how would I say this line better? And so that's hard work, yes. And his paycheck reflects that, and the value he delivers to clients reflects that.
And that's really what we're going for. How do we increase the value to our clients? And everything counts. Recording yourself is fantastic. Playing it back. I was talking to an advisor on a power team call the other day, Jarvis, and they were getting into content creation. And we were commiserating, right? Because so often you think you have all this great information. You turn the camera on, you turn the lights on, you look in the camera, I don't know what to say, right? I mean, it all goes blank on you. And so, well, great news. That was a practice reel, and do it again and do it again. And once you get about 10,000 videos under your belt, then you're going to be fairly good at it and you can roll a lot faster. But it's a lot between 0 and 100, right? And then 100 to 1,000. Those are all reps that you have to do. And I'm going to say just from our videos, I probably did 10 to 15 to 1 ratio of how many times I would have to take a recording to get a video to produce. And that video still wasn't A quality. It was the first ones I was putting out, right? Compared to now. But guess what? I just had to put the reps in. And this is where junior advisors, this is where advisors that aren't going to be successful, this is where they stop. Well, they're going to be mediocre advisors, right? They're going to do it. Yeah. They can live a good income. They can do these things, but you're not going to elevate to rock star status if you're not willing to do those hard things.
Yeah, you've got to look down the list. And I always had to keep them written out because your brain will block the hard things, by the way. Yeah. Mike, I don't want to speak for you. I've gotten to events and then suddenly realized I did not practice for this event. I did not check the batteries in the clock. I did not check the marks. Your brain does not want to do hard activities. This has to be a checklist. In fact, Micah, the reason I ended up going through I mentioned being all that stuff I went through is when I pulled out our seminar bucket. I know you have a seminar bucket too, or buckets. Right on the top was a checklist from like 5 years ago. It was all old and crinkly, and there it had all the things. Replace all the batteries, replace all the markers, replace all the Post-it notes, check all the cords. It was there because me at some point was like, I forget step 3 because we just don't want to do hard things. And again, the advisors at the top of the game are doing hard things. It's just, it's a non-negotiable. Everywhere I look, and Micah, you and I have now worked with hundreds, thousands of advisors. It is 100% correlated how hard they work with the results they get.
You know, Jarvis, what you just said, I think was fantastic. I want to make sure our audience picked up on that. He didn't say in the checklist, check the batteries. That's not on the checklist. What is it? replace
the batteries.
The batteries. That
Yes.
is correct. And that was a hard lesson learned. I'm at least guessing on your end. Oh, the batteries are fine. Then about halfway through the presentation, they die and you didn't bring backup batteries, right? So not only is it replace the batteries, I have spare batteries with it as well. And the off chance that those go wrong, right? This is game day. Right? This isn't practice day. Practice day is in advance. You're running through all that stuff. But game day, you make sure everything goes off as everything in your control. You want to make sure you control it the best you possibly can.
Something that really helps me with that when there's hard work that I don't want to do is to really connect it to the dollar amount at stake. So let's use this client event we did. We had 43 clients there, 45 clients. Let's call it 40. Let's call that 20 households, right? Typically a husband and wife. So 20 households, 8 clients. Let's use easy math. Let's say each of them is paying me $10,000 a year. Now it's more than that. It's really closer to $20,000 a year. We start doing the math. And so I start saying, wait a second, 20 clients times $10,000 a year. There's $200,000 of reoccurring revenue right here in this room. It was actually a lot higher than that. And so I stop and I say, all right, if these clients were judging our entire relationship, if they walked into this room saying, you know what, if this sucks, I'm firing Jarvis. Now, no one is walking into that, but that's what I think. If they walk in and say, if this sucks, I'm going to fire Jarvis. I come into that room thinking there is $200,000 a year at stake here. Same with the prospect meeting. Hey, this prospect's going to pay me $15,000 a year, $20,000 a year. Cool. There's $20,000 at stake. That's worth practicing. That's worth taking 10 minutes ahead of time to visualize the success of this meeting.
Yeah, going through like the extra steps in little things. I had a prospect meeting the other day, Jarvis, at a mini surge. And one of the things I found is they had a business tax return that they had a bunch of real estate property on, 1065. So it's like, great. So then I just real quickly Googled the properties in the different states and found out all of them were owned in their individual names. So they've gone to the effort of creating an LLC, but they haven't gone to the effort of funding the LLC. So they have no liability protection whatsoever, but they're filing a business tax return on all these things, right? The reason I bring this up is the other advisors that they have met with, because I was about third or fourth in the line that they met with.
Wow.
None of them have ever checked that. So really little things right there, right? That going the extra mile only took me an extra couple of minutes to do a quick Google search and quickly find out that they don't own this. Now, I don't tell clients, by the way, and prospects, I'm socially stalking them because that becomes a little awkward, but I start asking questions and leading down that path, and I already know where the answer is. So that's a really important thing about prospect questions. A lot of the guided discovery I have, I know where we're going because I've done the homework to get ready for that appointment. Whether it's a prospect, whether it's a client, whether it's a client event, what am I doing to really prepare everything that I possibly can?
Boy, a great example of that, and I'll take one on the chin here. I was recently meeting with a client and we were introducing them to a new CPA. And in my mind, I had thought we were meeting in person, that this meeting was really just going to be the CPA talking to the client, right? Because that's what you do. And we get about 2 minutes in, the CPA turns and starts drilling me about a lot of, not in a bad way. The CPA was just trying to figure out what was going on. And I immediately realized I did not come prepared in that meeting like I should have come prepared.
Yep.
And so I mentioned that, and I was able to get things I was able to say, as I always do. Hey, you know what? I'll get that to you. Yep, I'll get you the answer to that. But I was embarrassed. I really was embarrassed. And these were obscure things they were asking. Like, was this thing taken care of 4 years ago? I don't remember if it was taken care of 4 years, but had I reviewed back through my notes, had I been better prepared, I would have been. But one of the things I take, and you mentioned about like the PowerPoint going dead or the batteries quit working, I always assume that everybody else is going to fail at their job and every other piece of technology is going to quit working. Not because that's going to happen, but because I'm ready enough. So if I get there and I can't get the computer to work and the slides and everything dies, I can give that entire presentation from memory. Yep. Why? Because that's what I have to do. Like if I get there and everything craps out and I'm not prepared, I'm out of luck. Now, when things don't crap out and I'm that prepared, I'm crushing that thing.
You know, the other part about this, Jarvis, to think about it is, and there's a book With Winning in Mind that talks about this, Lanny Basham, and you have practiced that at such a level that your subconscious is running the presentation. And that's our goal, right? Our goal is to practice this presentation so much that subconsciously we are running that. Now, what does that allow our conscious brain to do? Look at the audience, engage with them, right? When I'm doing the presentation, I know you're the same way. I'm looking at the audience, I'm making eye contact, as you said earlier, but then I can see when someone has a question. And because my subconscious is running the presentation, I know what's coming up, I can pause it and say, Sue, did you have a question on this? Oh yeah, okay, let's go through it. Now I can pull that question out. If the only thing I'm focused on, my conscious brain is so focused only on the slide, I'm looking at the slide, I'm reading the slide and whatnot, I'm not engaging the audience, I'm not able to pull that out. That's not a 10x presentation. So you have to run this at a subconscious level so your conscious brain can be engaged with the audience.
I'm grinning here for those of you just listening. I'm grinning like ear to ear because you just mentioned like, sir, do you have a question? Now, just for you listening, they're amateurs. This wasn't because the guy had his hand over his head like you did in elementary school because he needed to go to potty. This is because his eye twitched. His eye twitched. The most subtle thing, a small change in his expression, just the smallest change that he might not have even noticed. Right. But again, because Micah, you're on the subconscious, because you've trained so much on human behavior, on neuro-linguistic programming, on reading body language. Sir, do you have a question? Now, by the way, even if I read that wrong and he didn't have a question, everyone's still just like, wow, he's really kind of interested. But that is the level of commitment that it takes. So when you look at your paycheck, when you look at your tax return and you say, hey, how come I didn't make $1 million last year? I'll tell you why. You're not doing the hard work.
Yeah. So on that, let's say I read the room wrong, right? Let's say I read the room wrong and the person didn't have a question, right? Here's what I say. Okay, well, great. I just want to check. Hey, I love questions and that's where I love to excel. So you stop me at any time. I am great about getting back on agenda. In fact, I have a whole PowerPoint slide of exactly where I am right in front of me. So I would love to answer your questions. And everyone laughs just like you did, right? So that's a quick little recovery. So if I read it wrong or they just didn't want to ask their question, I want to invite questions. And I really feel questions are where advisors are going to shine because I'm going to get off of the pages, off of the PowerPoint deck into your personal situation and answer your question. That's where I'm adding value.
Somewhat related, because we're on this whole topic of events, I have for years recommended that advisors take speaking classes, that they take stand-up comedy classes, and I almost never meet advisors who follow through on that. Almost never.
Yep.
And the ones who don't complain about not making money, and the ones who do say, holy smokes, that really transformed, right? Whether it's, again, public speaking, comedy, a body language class, there's so many different ways. I say, well, if I'm going to be a master of my trade, I have to work harder than everybody else. And again, we're all about having a balanced lifestyle, but you earn that lifestyle and you earn it by doing the hard things.
So Jarvis, let's talk a little bit of other head trash that came up actually in my social life the other day. Is I was with a bunch of kids. We were talking about stuff and going through it. And I was like, hey, you guys need to work on your communication, right? Because we're going to have communication through our entire life. A great book to read on this is going to be Winning, what was it? Hearts at, Carnegie. My brain's going out on me. So apparently
How to Win Friends and Influence People.
How to Win Friends and Influence People. Thank you very much.
Classic
book. I said, hey, you got to read this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's going to be really good for you in the long term. And one of the other adults came up and he's like, man, that book is all about manipulating people and blah, 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 blah. And it really just kind of shocked me because that's not how I see that book whatsoever. Yeah. And I really had to step back and say, whoa, this is all about intentionality right here. Yes. What and how are we using this information? The same thing when we're reading body language, right? You can have a negative perception on that of saying you're just trying to manipulate someone. No, I'm not. I'm trying to help be an effective communicator to get clients closer to their goals. And if that means I need to pay attention to when someone holds their breath because they're concerned about something, when their eyes get big, when they lean in, when they have that little look on their face, right? When they shift that body language so I can engage with them and say, hey, did you have a question on this? Please push back on me, ask questions. I want to make sure you get your questions answered. That's effective communication. And that doesn't have anything to do on the manipulation side of it. It's about being a better person, engaging with them to help us reach our goals, which is we want to help more than 1 million federal employees retire. And I'm going to do that by engaging with as many of them as that I possibly can do.
Now, as we get sort of the tail end of this episode, I want to remind everyone, and Micah, I don't want to speak for you, but you were terrible at this at the beginning.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I was horrific at this. I was terrible at public speaking. I was terrible at networking. I was terrible at communicating. Yes. I was botching I was pulling out 60-page financial plans and reading it to people. I was, I would have to turn the form back my way because I couldn't read upside down yet. I was wearing suits that didn't fit right. I didn't understand the positioning of the room. I didn't think it mattered that the room was too hot. I just didn't understand any of these things. And Mike, I know we share very similar origin stories, which is I was losing so much money so quickly. I had no choice, right? The ships had to be burnt. And a lot of advisors just won't burn the ships. They won't do that really hard work. And Micah, to your point, sometimes it's just because they get to a comfortable income, right? They're making $100,000 a year. They're saying, well, this is a decent job. A lot of them just wash out. But all of us, and again, I've yet to meet an exception to that. We know a lot of very high performing, incredibly valuable advisors. And I think without fail, they all started at the very bottom of the rung and just clawed their way out.
I was talking with a younger advisor. They're doing a generation planning right now, is that a senior advisor wants to transfer into a new advisor that's coming into the business. And so I was chatting a little bit with them on a coaching call. And one of the things that came out in there is he's new to kind of the TPR stuff. The senior advisor, he loves this stuff. He's like, no, this makes sense. This is what we're going to do. We're doing Invictus. This makes a ton of sense. And this younger advisor, he starts asking all these doubtful questions about things, right? And he's really trying to put an engineer hat on and kind of slice and dice into everything and explain how things work and how they don't work, right? Well, really that time doesn't count because da-da-da, and starts pushing back on me. And I really had to say stop. I was like, look, you have a choice. Do you wish to follow the path of success, or do you wish to create your own path through the woods and you have no idea what the outcome is, but the way you're going is failure, right? But that's your path. Those are the two options in front of you. You can make any other options you want, but those are the two options you have in front of you. And if you keep going down this path of saying what all the successful people have done, I'm going to do something completely different, why would you expect to have a successful outcome? The easy path here, and this is really hard for us to do, I think, as advisors, because we want to get too much in the weeds, is to step back and say, what are all the successful people doing? Why don't I just do that? Right? I mean, that's really as complicated as it needs to be. Now, it's hard work, but it's not complex.
Yeah, and when you get to the top of the game, right? When your practice is doing, $1 million gross or above, that's when you can say, hey, listen, I want to try something. I think there is an undiscovered path. That's fine at that point. When you're at 100,000 or 300 or 500,000 of top line revenue, this is not the time for you to experiment. This is, Micah, to your point, who has the practice that I want? Ideally, multiple who's that have the practice that you want, and just do what they do and ask them like, hey, what's the thing that you would do if you were in my shoes again? What was the hardest lesson that you learned? What was the mistake that you kept making that I should try to avoid? Those answers will transform your practice, assuming you implement them.
Jarvis, and experimenting became fun once I had economic certainty. When I didn't have economic certainty, experimenting was not fun. It was friggin' scary, right? Was this going to work or was it going to not work? But once I started going down that path of success, and now whatever that number is for you, there was economic, I wasn't worried about the friggin' mortgage being paid, right? I wasn't worried about expenses. We could take vacations, we could do these things. Now it said, okay, I'm going to allow X amount and that's it for experimenting. I'm going to keep doing Y because it works. So don't stop it because it works. And then if I want to tweak something, I'm going to give it a space to live. I'm going to only allow this amount of money, this amount of time, and that's where I'm going to play in my experimental space, but I'm going to keep doing what works. And then if my experiment works, fantastic, it goes over to the what works pile. If it doesn't work, I say, great, I'm glad I limited my time and money, and then I go play with something else. So experimenting, I love your point. Experimenting is fine to do, but get to the path of success with your economic certainty first. Follow what works. Don't make this overcomplicated. Do the damn work that needs to get done in order to be successful. Don't try to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. Well, speaking of work, this podcast is all about taking action, AKA doing the work. And so, Micah, I would say action item number one from this, whatever you're working on, we talked a lot about client events or prospect events, whatever it is you're working on, what are the hard reps, right? What are the hard practices you need to do? And do those reps. Just like if you go to the gym, if you do the one workout you always love to do, you're not getting stronger. You're just doing the one thing you love to do. You have to do the hard reps. And if you're not sure what those hard reps are, again, find someone who's crushing whatever it is you're trying to accomplish and ask them and say, hey, what's the one drill I could be doing? And you're going to hate the answer. You're going to loathe the answer. It's going to be like, stand here with your eyes closed and visualize it 100 times. I don't want to do that. Well, okay, well, it's up to you. Have success or don't. I don't really care. But that's the rep you need to do.
Oh, I freaking love that. I was going to add on to that one as well is on those reps, right? What's the thing that you could do that would 10x the value, not the quantity, the value of what you're doing? Standing there and visualizing it, practicing it 100 times, right? Getting a speech coach. All of these things are so important that you got to do. So what's that one thing that you could add 10x more value to in your surge meetings, in your prospect process, right? In your client communications, any of those things? What is it?
Next action item, as a thank you to our nation, our podcast listeners, there is in my garage about 1,000 copies of my new book, Delivering Massive Value, the hardcover edition. We are giving those away to our listeners. You need to pay for shipping, so we're not going to pay you to take them. But this first batch of books, we are giving those away. You can go to theperfectria.com, click on Matt's book, and you can order a copy. But once those are gone, they're gone. You can also go to Amazon, and they're $50 on Amazon. So if you want to support the podcast financially, like a patron thing, buy them on Amazon. If you're a loyal listener, go ahead and go to theperfectria.com and get signed up for one of those books.
All right, I got to push back on you, Jarvis. Sorry, I know we're going long. I love that you say that I'm not going to pay you to take these books, but but you're giving away for free and they're paying for shipping. So you are paying them to take the book. They have to eat some of the cost, but you paid for the book. You wrote the book. You edited it, hired an editor, right? So we won't even get into all the costs. So yes, you are being paid for the book. Now do your part, which is pay for shipping. And yeah,
I charge that part to you, Micah. So that's why I said I'm not going to. Micah's paid. But it's a good point. I mean, it's definitely a labor of love. That book is, there's a lot of painful lessons.
It's amazing. It's a really great book.
Painful lessons.
Awesome. Jarvis, as always, thank you so much. And until next time, happy planning.
Happy planning.
Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you